Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for this Spotlight webinar. My name is Ashley Campo. I am the Outreach Coordinator here at NOCTI, and I will be facilitating today's webinar where we will be discussing score report data, how to read it, and how to use it to inform school and program improvement. We're really excited to have all three authors of both the original and revised edition of our Putting Your Data to Work book with us today, Dr. John Foster, Dr. Carol Hodes, and Dr. Sandy Pritz. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Everyone, please welcome John, Carol, and Sandy.
So I think I'm going to start, and I'm going to start just a little bit by talking about the environment that we were in when we originally came up with this resource. Both ourselves, NOCTI and ACTE, realized that a really important piece of the overall educational improvement strategy. And at the time, we knew that there were an awful lot of data books out there geared to all kinds of different occupational areas, and particularly in education. But there weren't any that we could find that were targeted to career and technical education. So we did a bit of research with the National Research Center for Career and Technical Education, and we came up with a resource that we thought would be helpful to everyone that was interested in instructional improvement. Anyway, with the current temperature of our career and technical education environment right now, we know that credentials seem to be a very hot button kind of topic. And, if you think about it, almost every state that we can think of has some sort of an approval process, or at least a recommendation process for the type of credentials that, that schools and community colleges and folks who are in the whole credentialing movement are interested in. Typically, those approvals are based on what the credential can do for either the employer or maybe the student, and they seem to sometimes forget about what the data behind those credential assessments can do to help improve the program itself. So that's kind of where we want to focus a bit of today's conversation. So, in general, the reason that we think data is so important is because it provides a kind of a third-party look at what's going on in a particular instructional environment. And typically, the more gradient that data, the deeper that data is, then the better it is for instructional improvement. Probably most of the folks on the call have had some exposure to developing a job and task analysis, and you probably know that a job and task analysis uses terminology that takes an occupational area and it divides it into standards or duty areas, and then it cuts it a little bit deeper into competencies or tasks. We want to get to the data that's at that competency or that task level, because that's the kind of data that can be used to help us in our instructional improvement. It's third-party data. It's a look from somebody else at what we're doing in our classrooms and potentially provide clues as to how it can be improved. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Sandy and ask her to talk a little bit about the topics that are in this resource. So, Sandy, if you want to take the next couple slides.
Okay, thanks, John. Yes, to jump into the book itself, the chapter layout was decided because we knew that you all have orderly minds, and we wanted to try to lay out each chapter in a consistent way for easy access for your orderly minds. We think we have orderly minds too, being educators. The content is presented in a very conversational tone. It's separated into sections of the main topic. And in this revised version, we elected to include next what we call other voices. These other voices come from our friends and colleagues across the country, and they provide real and personal perspectives about their own interaction related to the content of that chapter. And we feel that these breathe some life into that content, which is important. And then finally, to emphasize the highlights, we provide a summary of key points at the end of each chapter. The chapter topics are listed here, some of the topics, not all of them, and they follow in a logical order. First, there's some background about how instructional improvement can be driven by data, followed by ways that educators can access related professional development. And then the background of how employers need trained employees with evidence of skills. Evidence is an important word there. That background sets the stage to motivate educators to learn to like data enough to use them in the pursuit of instructional improvement. So I think you can see the way the logic is threaded through here in the chapter topics so far. And then, Carol, there's some more chapter topics I think you want to talk about.
Right. Like John and Sandy said, the book's topics take you through a continuous improvement process specifically for CTE teachers. Using the many sources of data that exist in your school, this process will help you analyze data, learn to verify and triangulate data by looking at relevant data from other sources. Then, based on your goals, develop an action plan to focus on areas needing improvement. During plan implementation, you'll collect key data. Outcomes can be compared to your baseline, and that determines the plan's success. Chapter 1 lays out the rationale for the data-driven instructional improvement process. We want CTE educators to understand how to use all the data they have available to identify gaps. For example, a pretest can reveal students' prior knowledge and determine which students might need assistance. A review of several years of data can verify which areas of the curriculum have been a persistent problem for all students.
Yeah, and I'm going to continue on here and just talk a little bit about some more detail about Chapter 1. You know, Carol talked about the content that's involved in Chapter 1, and Sandy mentioned one of the things we included was something called Other Voices. And when we look at those submissions from the Other Voices, they really came from, I think, 11 different states across the country. Each chapter has one other voice included in it. And in the chapter that Carol was talking about, we spoke to an individual from Texas, one of the Texas independent school districts, and she talked about the value of data in her particular environment. And, you know, rather than go through some of the points on the slide, I think what I'll do is just read a little section from what she had said. And she starts by, or she finishes by saying, how do you know they know? That's the question every educator asks themselves once the lesson ends and the competencies have been taught, especially in a CTE environment where all training is hands-on and skill-based. We evaluate the student's performance and we test their knowledge, give them skills to handle the tools needed to succeed, and finally, wrap it all together in a situational or practical application. Can we then measure our success as teachers or curriculum developers on average success rate of the whole classroom? If we want to assure success for every student, we must turn the data spotlight inward and ask the hard question of why did this particular task or skill come up short, if indeed it did. The hardest part for any analysis of performance is to acknowledge success and areas for improvement throughout the whole process with equal enthusiasm. By focusing on what the data is telling us, we are able to provide the best learning environment for our students. So I think that kind of gives you a sense of kind of input that we try to provide through the Other Voices section. I also wanted to mention something else that I think Sandy mentioned, and that is the key learnings. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but in each one of the chapters, as Sandy indicated, we provide some content, we provide these other voices, and then we try to provide some key learnings, some things you should have picked up from the chapter. And in that first chapter that Carol talked about, some of the key learnings are listed on the slide there for you. It talks about the value of technical skills and them being the very core of career and technical education. It talks about having an understanding of data, something that Sandy mentioned early on, helping an instructor develop a love, a like for data and an understanding of how to use it in his or her instructional environment. And then talk a little bit about some models that exist to help educators work with that gradient technical data that we talked about before. I think all those things are important components of the chapter. Sandy, would you like to talk about Chapter 2?
Yes, because it relates exactly to what you were saying, that, we want educators to really feel that they can gain the skills that will make them feel comfortable using data for instructional improvement. So we looked a lot into the research about the characteristics of effective professional development, ways in which educators could most effectively learn. And that is the topic of Chapter 2. You can read here some of the most important characteristics that we found through the research. And of course, it will cross your mind that these are valid for professional development related to data, but also more broadly, really, for all professional development. And you can see them all here. I won't just read them, but one of the things that I would really highlight is the next to last bullet, emphasis on analysis and reflection, because really data doesn't mean anything until someone tries to really analyze it and reflect on what that analysis shows. And then to connect that to a change process that is comprehensive enough to really hopefully effectively improve student learning. So we try to provide a lot of information in the book about how this can be contextualized and how you can gain the sense that you're not in this alone, that there's a focus on collaboration. The same Chapter 2, goes on to outline how to proceed with data-driven professional development, with the goal in mind as highlighted here in the last bullet. Knowing how possible it is to work with these ideas is so important, and that's where our other voices come in. These other voices give us reason to believe them, that indeed it is possible to really achieve this goal of identifying strategies that matter for student learning, and then to deliver a logical plan that's focused on long-term results-oriented professional development, and that keyword improvement. So some of the key learnings that you probably could already predict, given that we've said what we've already said about this chapter, this will be at the end of every chapter, these key learnings, and you'll note that these give emphasis to the characteristics of effective professional development that you saw earlier. Notice the word collaborative, relevant tasks, ongoing support through mentors or coaches, I think, is an important one. But ultimately, what we're trying to get at is a higher level of educator understanding that helps them to help students achieve at a higher level. Now, Carol's going to talk about the example of another chapter.
Yes, Chapter 9, we talk about the implementation of the action plan. And we know educators always try to work from goals. And the one thing you can do is, when developing your plan, write the type of goal that will be most useful. A SMART goal is defined as one that is specific, measurable, achievable, results-focused, and timely. And including those elements in your goal makes it's easier to understand who, what, and why of what it is you're trying to achieve. Another tool is the root cause analysis, and we give an example of that. It's a good tool to use where you ask why 5 times, and each of those answers you get gets you closer to the root cause of the problem. In terms of data format, NOCTI's reports are organized by tasks and competency to facilitate the process of analyzing class results. And today, many schools have learning management systems that enable educators to frequently view student progress. If not, keep data organized in a format that will help you see results over time. Some companies, especially manufacturing, use something called the Kaizen approach, and this begins with identification and analysis of a problem. Solutions are found to improve efficiency and save money, and when teachers have access to student data, they're continually informed of how well the curriculum and their instructional strategies are working. Your goals will come directly from your observations of the findings from your data. Find those low areas in need of improvement. These areas could indicate various needs, such as specific skills that are critical, vocabulary or abstract concepts, or other curricular topics. Or perhaps the analysis reveals the need for updated equipment in the shop or lab. Once you're in the planning and implementation stages, reflect on your goals and make adjustments. Again, techniques such as root cause analysis and progress tracking enable a close look at how things are working. Back to John.
Thanks, Carol. And Sandy and Carol, that's a great synopsis of the 2 chapters of the text there, the resource. I wanted to mention just a couple of other things that are available. When we started this conversation, we mentioned the fact that ACTE was one of our partners, and like NOCTI, ACT believes in trying to provide resources to continually improve career and technical education for not only the students but the teachers and the administrators, and just make a good solid program that shows results. I wanted to just highlight a couple of other things that we do with ACTE, and these were actually developed after the original data book was put out as a resource. We have 3 books that are available that are focused on new CTE teacher training, and they're kind of referred to as the 10 Things to Know series. These were written by different authors and, again, have the same kind of case study involvement in the chapters that the data book does. But they focus on mostly individuals who come in from an alternative background. So an industry person who comes in without an education background. That first book talks about their first 3 months and how to survive in the classroom after not only changing jobs, but changing occupations from whatever it is, manufacturing or health or human services or whatever, and moving into education is a pretty big shift. That second book talks about some basics that you should know, things like lesson planning and IEPs and working with career and technical student organizations and occupational advisory committees, those sorts of things. And the last one, the orange book, talks about becoming a professional in your chosen field, sharing your expertise with others in your community and making your program more visible. I'll just mention on the right-hand side of the slide, too, we have are in the process of developing a similar resource for CTE administrators. What we're finding is that there's a need for not only additional CTE teachers with the additional upsurge in CTE interest from students and parents and employers, of course, but also a need for CTE administrators. And what's happening in some states is that administrators are being moved into a career and technical education administrative environment without having had the benefit of working in a CTE field. And in some cases, that's quite a large change as well. So we developed a set of resources for new CTE administrators. The first one there, the blue one, is available now, and the second one we're hoping will be available at Vision 2018. coming up here in Texas. So those are just some resources that are available from ACTE and NOCTI, some examples of some services and some resources that we've tried to provide to help improve, CTE from our little corner of the world. I think that brings us to questions, but I'd be remiss if I didn't stop and thank Andy and Carol for jumping in on this webinar with us. But I guess, Ashley, it goes back to you.
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Sandy. Where can people find the Putting Your Data to Work book, and when is the revised edition going to be available?
We're told that revised edition of data book will be available at Visions 2018, and of course you can find a link either on the NOCTI webpage, or you can also find it at the ACT bookstore, either spot, their online bookstore, that is.
Great.
And I might add, Ashley, that they are very affordable, and so that's an important point as well.
That's very true. I think there's special ACTE member pricing on them even. I want to thank everyone again for joining us for this presentation today. Be sure to check out our website for other Spotlight Series webinars that we will have throughout the school year. And please let us know if you have any questions in the following days. We have our website up here, our phone number, our email address, and then we have Dr. Foster's email down at the bottom of your screen as well. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. Thank you, John, Carol, and Sandy for presenting today.
You're so welcome.
You're welcome.
Welcome.
Everyone have a great afternoon.